And so my question was, when you create a promotion or when you push someone through for a promotion, what are you basing it on more of? Is it based on performance or is it based on potential? And it's about a 2/3 split saying they are basing it on performance versus potential. What does the group think about that? I have heard, different things around, moving people into a role based on performance because past success does not indicate future success, but potential is a much harder thing to quantify and justify when you're actually trying to submit a promotion request. So I'm curious if the group has any thoughts on that poll. Do those numbers surprise you? Do you agree with them? How do we fall here in this group?
I think
I'll start.
Go
ahead, Kathy.
I was just going to quickly say my initial reaction is that it's, I guess, not so surprising, and probably to your point, Justin, because it's easier to measure performance than potential.
Yeah, I think we're also victims to a false binary choice here, right? Like literally, you don't say it has to be one or the other, in practice. And my experience in operating roles is that you think about the 9 box, very rarely do you get people that are high potential, low performers, because like psychologically, it's hard for us to see potential if they don't perform. So I find they're well correlated. Everyone lives on the diagonal of the matrix, just because it's hard to separate them as a leader. So you have to have both, I guess, is the way that promotions tend to show up. You have to have done something good, and we have to have confidence you can do it, in an expanded position.
And I think a good coach will tell you that as well. It's not your potential is nothing without being able to demonstrate that you can do something with it, right? So, a good coach and a good manager is going to say, like, you've got potential, but now we need to prove it to your peers and prove it to the organization. So those results I think kind of make sense to me as well. As much as I like to believe potential is so much more important than performance, you've got to prove it in some capacity.
Yeah, I actually did some research on this topic quite recently, and there is a report, at least when you look at like what are the different levers that companies use to recognize performance and potential. And so I was looking at the stock piece, and stock is usually forward-looking, but it was from a Radford study that said about 90% of companies use LTI to motivate future performance, and then about half of companies use it to recognize past performance. So I don't think a lot of surveys out there usually use that word potential. From what I've seen, it's usually performance. But to both James and Paul, your points, I think potential is a factor of performance. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive.
And I definitely did make the poll a binary choice. You had to pick one. I noticed there were lots of comments that said, well, we obviously have to pick both, and I don't disagree. One of the comments that I found really interesting, that I really liked too, was that potential is what you use to gauge when you're going to give someone the opportunity to demonstrate their performance. So if you recognize someone has a high potential within their role, you can then provide those stretch goals, stretch tasks that they can then use to kind of demonstrate their performance. And I thought that was a really nice way to kind of marry the two together, but also give a real kind of strong sense of when you can use one for the other to kind of move things forward, as most companies are a pay-for-performance organization and promote based on performance, it sounds like. So I thought that was a great insight.
Yeah, and I think the practical way, practical tool, which I think often goes underused, is, I think, is it a common a personal action plan? Has anyone heard that term before? It's essentially just a plan you set out with your report to say, yeah, like to that point, we've identified you with the potential. Now we need to figure out exactly what you need to do to demonstrate that. I think it's just a great forward-looking tool for coaching, where you can sit down with somebody. So it's marry up what you want to do with what you need to demonstrate in order to prove that you can do that.
Yeah, we're seeing kind of an interesting comment in the chat to kind of say that the LTI may also be kind of another false binary choice, because we are philosophically rewarding both the past performance and motivating for the future. Any thoughts on that? To me, any kind of incentive plan that is performance-based is going to be based upon past performance, where the LTI, that growth piece, though it may be rewarded based on something in the past, is incentivizing kind of the the longer term retention and the future performance, both of the individual as well as the company. Anything to add to that?
I think that's probably why stock has been given out so broadly and then shrunk back so much over time, is that there's a lot of confusion about what its purpose is and who actually gets value from it. So I think the performance piece is definitely important. It falls along the same logic, I think, though, as if you're trying to justify something based on perceived potential, if we can use that term. I think that can be a little bit of a fuzzy, blurry situation for employees about what's actually being expected of them and those kinds of things. The truth is, we're compensation people. We're basing what a target LTI amount should look like based on what the market is telling us for the role that someone is in today. So whatever you're receiving is very likely going to be based on whatever job title you have as of today. And other organizations may choose to accelerate past that a little bit to sort of say, here's what you could potentially do when you move into a future role. But I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of hesitation around whether you communicate too much to an employee, creating some level of like, is there a guarantee, or is there something that, is this an absolute thing? If I perform X, Y, and Z against this criteria, does that automatically create a promotion opportunity for me? Or like, how does that actually work?